the expectations of what you need to do for the exam, how the exam is going to work. We covered sample questions, covered the importance of moving through it quickly. We talked about how to register online, all those wonderful things. Then we went to the main handout. We talked about the types of questions. We talked about the legacy exam, the prior exam, and we talked about all of the old style questions. And if the old style questions were important, you know, the famous cities, name 3 beers over 1070, all that sort of thing. If it was important on the legacy exam, it's going to be important on this exam. The questions are just going to be phrased differently. We got into water. We talked about the importance of the ions: calcium, magnesium, bicarbonate, sodium, sulfate, chloride. Talked about all the things you need to know there. Talked about how to make adjustments to your water a little bit. How to get rid of some of the total dissolved solids. How to adjust the pH. Talked a little bit about the famous cities and the water profiles and the beers from those cities. And I said, if anything else, at least know the review page on water. Okay? You should be studying everything, but at least know the review page. We talked about malting. In the new handout that I sent out were links to the Highland Park. Did you check those out? Anybody? Check that out. Be sure to do that. You should be studying and doing some stuff in between classes. Don't wait and try to cram all this into a weekend or something. We talked about the different types of malted barleys. Talked about how caramel or crystal malt, same thing, does not need to be mashed. We talked about how roasted barley is not malted, it's just roasted. Again, we talked about the review page. We talked about light body. We talked about DMS, vegetal, skunky, sweet versus malty, and I think we covered phenolic. Talked about the judging process. We didn't cover that, but that's stuff you need to know. You have all this bank of questions that are true, false, and everyone needs to know how to answer every one of these. Okay? It was an important part of the legacy exam, so I guarantee it's going to be an important part of the new exam, the new online entrance exam. We sort of got into styles, but boy, we didn't get very far. We slowly went through how to judge beer, and we did one together, and I think we only judged one or two other beers. Then we talked about light lagers. I want to make sure that we covered these well. This is where you need your guidelines. Key things to know. You can't possibly, well, I mean, over time, you can know everything in here. But when you're initially studying for this exam, it's hard to know everything. Know the key points, and if you know the key points, and you understand the style, and you can think of good commercial examples of the style, you can sort of start to guess and just intuitively fill in the blanks on some of these styles, right? I mean, do you have to memorize at this point what color a light lager is? Okay, these are things we know because we drank the beer before. So if you can go back and think about the commercial example of the beer, you got to know a commercial example anyway. So if you can go back and think about a commercial example of the beer, then just think of what it tastes like. Think of of how you would describe it based on that. You can start to fill in a lot of the blanks. Okay. But there are certain things that you do need to know and just memorize. In the light American lager, standard American lager, premium American lager. Ingredients: 2 or 6 row barley. 2 or 6 row barley. Corn or rice. The adjuncts. Up to 40% in the light lager. Up to 40% in the standard lager. Up to 25% in the premium lager. Okay? So you know what the ingredients are. Basic malt and rice or corn. but know those percentages that it goes up to. Okay? Know a commercial example of each. Light American Lager, take any of the mass marketed light beers, right? Miller Lite. Standard American Lager. If you use Miller Lite for the standard American Lager, you can go Miller High Life. Okay? Premium American Lager. If you stick with the Miller school, you can go with the Miller Genuine Draft for the premium. Okay? Know that the ABV on these, the Light American Lager is 3 to 4. Okay? The premium can go as high as 6. So if you went 3, 4, 5, you're in the range for each of those. Kind of right in the middle of the range, actually. The Munich Helles. We didn't talk too much, I think, about the Munich Helles. We judged one. Know that the Munich Helles is more about the malt profile. More about the malt. This is not a hop-focused beer. Pilsner malt, noble hops. Can have a little DMS. Remember, DMS doesn't come from corn. It comes from pale malt. The Dortmunder export. One key thing to remember about this, under the overall impression, second sentence, it has the malt profile of a Helles, the hop character of a Pils, and slightly stronger than both. Minerally water is a trademark of the Dortmunder exporter. High levels of sulfates, carbonates, chloride. Again, Pilsner malt, Czech hops, to lager. That was as far as we got. So we're going to pick up with Pilsners tonight, but first, let's go through the tech topic for the evening. Okay, and as I discussed last week, my goal here is not to try to teach you everything that you need to know for the exam, because that would take 100 hours. 100 hours needs to be used studying for the exam. Okay? What I'm going to try to do is point out the stuff you need to know. But then from there you need to make sure you study it and then you do know it. Right? You can read it. We can cover it briefly here and then read it on your own. That allows us more time in the study group sessions to focus on judging, which is going to be critical to pass the exam. All right? So, mashing. Mashing hops tonight. Primary goal of mashing is complete the breakdown of proteins and starches that was started during the malting process. Under-modified malts need to be taken through a step mash. Most malts today are fully modified, which is why most home brewers and craft brewers can get away with a single step mash, right? The single step being the final step, the saccharification rest, which is just converting those starches into sugars, right? But if you're using less modified malts, if you were to, I think you can still get a hold of some Moravian malt, like the Bohemian Pilsner's made from, which is not a fully modified malt, and is one of the reasons why they take it through a step and a decoction mash. So there are still some not fully modified malts out there. But also if you're brewing with adjuncts, it's important to go through a step mash because, for instance, corn or rice does not have enough diastatic power being that ability to convert the starches into sugars, doesn't have enough of it on its own. So you got to rely on the enzymes in the malt to help convert those starches into sugars and to get the full efficiency out of that process, it's better to go through a full step mash. Also, with rice and corn and adjuncts like that, their conversion temperatures are at different degrees than with barley. So there's various reasons to do a step mash. Those are some of them, though, and you will need to know that. Getting into that a little deeper, the acid rest is where it all starts. It takes place in the 95 to 120 degree range. More closely, 95 to 105. More closely, if you just said 100, that'd be a pretty good place to start. Remember it like this. Remember that before we had thermometers, remember we've been brewing for 1,500 years. How long have we had a thermometer out of that 1,500 years of brewing? Only the last couple hundred. So for 1,300 years or so, there was no thermometer, there was no pH meter, we didn't know what chemistry was, we didn't know what the ions of the water was. Brewing was an art, and it was done by trial and error. And when it comes to temperature, we only knew a few things as being consistent. One of the things that was fairly consistent in the world was body temperature. So body temperature, 98.6, rounded off, say right around 100, right? Oddly enough, that's where the acid rest starts, right around 100. That's where the brewing process started. And if you started at 100, and then you pulled out a chunk of that mash and took it to a boil and added it back in, it went up to the next level. They didn't know what it was at the time. We know what it is now, but we still follow the same process. We just know what the temperatures are now. Okay, but you can kind of remember that, or use that to remember that it starts around 100 degrees. So the acid rest, 100 degrees. Also know that lactic acid gets produced there in that 100, 110 degree range very, very readily. Don't let your infusion water exceed 140 degrees. You don't want to start hurting those enzymes. An extended acid rest may create too much lactic acid, lowering the pH too much and souring the beer. So you don't want to do an extended acid rest. 15 to 30 minutes, usually say about 20. Ferulic acid, very important acid that's also created during that acid rest. Ferulic acid is a precursor to 4-vinyl glycol. 4-vinyl glycol is that flavor we know as clove. So if you're making a Weizen beer, even if you're using fully modified malts and all that, it's still good to go through a step mash and do the acid rest, because you're going to create that ferulic acid that you need later to create the clove character. It's real easy to get the banana, right? I don't know if everyone's made a Hefeweizen. Real easy to get the banana. It's just an ester. It comes from the yeast and the temperatures. But it's harder to get the clove to balance with the banana character. So to help get that, do an acid rest and create more ferulic acid. After that, the protein rest. Stage for undermodified malts takes place in the 113 to 127 degree range for 15 to 45 minutes. Round that off to around 30. Don't underdo it, don't overdo it. You see there's a whole list of problems you can get into if you do that. But know those temperature ranges. Know not to let the water exceed 158 degrees. Again, don't want to kill off certain enzymes that are functioning at that range. Protein rest breaks down complex mashed proteins to create peptides and amino acids, which are essential for proper yeast growth. This rest also provides body, head retention, clarity, etc. FAN, free amino nitrogen, the product of enzymatic breakdown of proteins, a key nutrient for healthy yeast growth. For all those reasons, there's a whole lot of brewers that believe you should always do a protein rest. Not necessarily an acid rest, but a lot of people, even with fully modified malts, a lot of people still feel like you're going to make better beer and everything's going to be more efficient if you at least do a protein rest. Then we enter the saccharification rest. Starch conversion. Don't let the infusion water exceed 167 at this point. Again, you don't want to kill off enzymes that are active during this temperature range. This occurs in the 130 to 160 degree range. A more close range on that is probably 145 to 158. We talked about hot body. Remember hot body? Talked about that, Iranism. A hot mash is going to give you more body in the beer. A warmer mash, you get up around 155, 156 degrees, you're creating more unfermentable sugars. They're not going to ferment out, they're going to stay in the beer, which is going to give you more body in that beer. Less fermentable or more fermentable sugars are made at those lower ranges. A lot of the Belgian beers we talked about may mash at 145 degrees, which a lot of us would never think of doing, but they do. It creates a lot of highly fermentable sugars that ferment out very well and create a very dry beer. 45 to 120 minutes, mid-range on that, 60 to 90 is probably more common. Under conversion has its issues. Over conversion has its issues. Read about those, know those. Know what gelatinization, liquefaction, and saccharification means. Know what alpha amylase is versus beta amylase. Below 150 degrees favors beta amylase. Above 155 degrees favors alpha amylase. Final step, the lauter rest or the mash out. Optional period just before lautering, which is the removal of the sweet work from the mash, where the mash temp is raised to 165 to 170, usually here 168. 168 starts to kill those enzymes, stops the activity from taking place, so no more conversion can take place once you kill those enzymes and take the water up that high. If you go too high, though, at this point, you run into lots of problems. Temps above 170 degrees, all my degrees are in Fahrenheit, by the way. Temps above 170 degrees can leach out too many tannins from the malt husk and create a husky flavor, a grainy flavor. Can provide an astringency. It can also get into sort of a medicinal phenolic type character at real low levels. Excessive tannins can also create cloudiness. Mash in is the process of mixing and hydrating the grist. Lauter tun and mash tun can be separated. The mash enzymes, you should know these, bottom of page 45. Phosphatase enzymes, non-proteolytic enzymes, proteolytic enzymes. I've seen this on the test several times, proteolytic enzymes. Can't recall really seeing the others, but you should definitely, if you circle three things, circle proteolytic enzymes, beta amylase, and alpha amylase. You should know those enzymes, what they do, what temperatures they operate at. Okay? So those proteolytic enzymes function primarily during the protein rest. We talked about the single step. We just talked about the multi-step. Lastly, we should talk about decoction. Decoction is just a complicated way of doing a step mash, but has some very interesting byproducts. That chart there is one of the best I've ever seen to describe the process, because you can see you start with an acid rest down around 100 degrees. The dotted line is the third of the mash that you pull out and take up to a boil. If you ever do this, stirring the whole time is very important. You have a very thick oatmeal type substance that is going to scorch, so you need to take it up to that boil, but do so very carefully. When you add that back in, if you took out the right amount and you add that back in, it's going to magically take you up to that protein rest stage. That's your first decoction. Do it again, your second decoction. That'll take you up to your saccharification range, and do it again, and it takes you up to your mash out. Know that lautering and sparging is different. Lautering is basically that first runoff. Sparging is rinsing it with additional water. Know the three types of sparging techniques, I guess they are. English, batch, and continuous. So the English, isn't the English also referred to as party guile? It's basically where they pull off the initial runnings and make one beer with that, and then pull off the second runnings and make a small beer with that. You've even heard of them making 3 beers with that. Take your very initial runnings and make your big beer. Second runnings make an average beer, and the third runnings make table beer, which is your really low 2% type alcohol beer. And then batch is similar. It's basically where you drain it completely, fill it back up with water, your mash tun I'm talking about, and then drain it again. So doing it in batches. And then continuous, which is basically what I do, which is, it's all going on at once. I got water dribbling in on top and some coming out of the bottom. So if you don't have the equipment to do a continuous, it's better to do a batch. The no sparge interests me, and I've heard of some folks doing this lately. You're basically doing a party guile type English sparge where they would take just those first runnings and make a big beer with that. Okay, but after you've done that, why waste all those sugars that are still in the mash tun?
Set time.
Okay.
If you don't have the equipment to boil
To
the
mess with
second batch, then you just...
All right. Know all those things. We covered that all very quickly. But seriously, if you know all of that we just talked about, and you know the times and temps and the details that goes along with all that, you're going to do well on this section. There's a review section. At least know that part. Okay, hops. Know what hops are used for. They do more than just bitter beer. They also do more than the triple hopping of aroma and flavor and bitter. Hops are used for a reason historically. Such things as increasing head retention, increase its ability to inhibit bacterial growth, helps make the beer stable, gives it a longer shelf life, helps preserve it, aids in kettle coagulation, so hop break material gathering together. And then, of course, bitterness, aroma, and flavor. But know those other reasons of why we use hops. Brewers have toyed with lots and lots of things over the years, and hops seem to be the plant of choice. What are they? This stuff you can read on your own. Know that the main bittering agent, this is bottom of page 50 in the middle of that highlighted area. Know that the main bittering agent is the alpha acid resin, which is insoluble in water until it's isomerized by boiling. It's one of the reasons we have to boil the wort. You can't get the bittering agent out of the hop until you hit that temperature. Boiling allows the isomerization process to take place, which allows those alpha acids to become soluble and get into beer. The degree of isomerization is called utilization. You should know that. Know that utilization is affected by 4 things. The gravity of the wort, the boil time, the wort volume, and the vigor of the boil. Okay? You need to know that. You can know about first wort hopping, but may or may not be on the test. Know the main things about hops. Definitely know dry hopping, that's very common. Yeah, I don't think you're going to extract more bitterness after about 60 minutes. And you're certainly not getting aroma or flavor after that. But I don't know that it's going to hurt anything either. Hop forms, whole, plug, and pellets. Just know what they are. They all do the same thing. Yeah, I mean, a lot of commercial brewers use extracts just because it's more efficient. If you're not going to have a lot of hop flavor and aroma, you can do all of your bittering with extract. Most craft brewers want some hop aroma and flavor in their beers. So sometimes the isomerized hop extract is just used to fix a beer that maybe didn't get bitter enough. So you add a little touch of it. I used to teach the whole homebrew units and how to get to IBUs and all that, but I've never really seen that on the exam, and I don't think it's something that you would get into on the online entrance exam now. But you can read it over, page 55, 55 mostly, if you want to know how to convert the old homebrew units into AAUs. Utilization, though, is something a little more important that I think everyone should know. Page 57 is a wonderful little chart that shows gravity versus time and the utilization factor that you get out of that. Most important thing to know is just that your utilization is going to be affected by those four things: the time, the gravity, the bigger the boil, and the volume of the boil. Page 58. That was a way of calculating. Again, I used to teach this because on the recipe question, I felt it was important for you to explain how you came up with the amount of hops you want to add. And I thought the more detailed you are, the better. So instead of just saying, I'm going to use 1.5 ounces of Hallertau, well, why? What's that good? How'd you figure that? As opposed to, well, I plugged it into my Beersmith program and it said that. All right, but how do you know how to do that? This is how that was done. You want to see very quickly, in purple is what you would fill in the blanks with. So you would start by saying, well, I want my OG to be 1050, I want my IBUs to be 20, no aroma, hops. I'm going to use 1 hop, a Hallertau at 4.5% alpha. You would take that through the calculation of IBUs, the AAU times utilization times volume. 0.2 is an average utilization for bittering. For volume, 5 gallons with a factor in there, and basically you come up with this formula that IBUs is equal to AAUs times 3. You flip that around, AAUs is IBUs divided by 3. So if your IBUs are 20, you divide by 3, round that off, about 7. Take that down into the next area, 7 AAUs divided by your alpha acid percentage of 4.5, which after some rounding tells you need about 1.5 ounces of that hop. So before we had brewing software that did all these wonderful things for us, we actually used to have to calculate this stuff. So this is how we did it. Again, you may or may not need to know that for the exam, but it's kind of good stuff to know. Page 59 is a good little review of hops. Oh, one thing I did not cover was noble hops. And just for you guys, I have a Ronism for remembering the noble hops. Shots. Leave off the O. So capital S, capital H, little o, or whatever letter you put in there. Capital T, capital S. So S-H-T-S. Saaz, Hallertau, Tettnanger, and Spalt. Your 4 noble hops. Know what the lupulin glands are. I don't think we talked about that. Know the basic hopping rates. Know some classic examples for providing different flavors. Know that Saaz is that spicy, kind of peppery hop used in the Bow Pills. Know that Simcoe is piney. Know that Northern Brewer is the classic hop used in the California Common and is very woodsy and earthy and sometimes minty. Know that the classic C hops of America are citrusy and grapefruity, Cascade, Centennial, Chinook, Columbus. Know that EKG and Fuggles are classic English hops that are more flowery, perfumey, herbal. Okay, know the classics, at least. Okay, some quick off flavors, and we'll start judging, talking about beers. Astringency. Astringency. That's that overall drying sensation in the mouth, often caused by an over-extraction of tannins from over-sparging or sparging with too alkaline of water, usually produced from there. Sometimes using spices, too much cinnamon or allspice or various things like that can also give you an astringent character. Astringency is usually felt all around the mouth, a real dry sensation, chalky sensation right in the middle of the tongue. I describe it as that teeth feeling squeaky, kind of dry feeling. Different from bitterness, which most people experience way back here in the throat. Okay, way back there. Have to swallow to get it. Husky or grainy, again, often caused by over-sparging. Sparging issues often cause that. Grassy, not really necessarily an off flavor, but sometimes from hops. Earthy. A lot of people don't understand what earthy smells like. Have you ever dug dirt? Just dig in some dirt. What does dirt smell like? That's earthy. Did you ever go into kind of an old basement? Not moldy, but just an old basement. It's just sort of got that cellar basement smell. That can also be considered earthy. Variety, lots of hops, not lots, but some hops can produce that earthy character. Corked beers can also produce that character. Diacetyl or diacetyl, that's a fermentation byproduct. It's made naturally during the fermentation process, and if you allow the beer to finish, the yeast that's still active will reabsorb that diacetyl and it will be cleaned up from the beer. If you don't have a vigorous fermentation that finishes completely, the yeast may tire out before it finishes that job. If you're doing a lager, that can be more susceptible because under the colder, slower fermentation conditions, the yeast may sort of stop working a little prematurely. If that happens, you can do a diacetyl rest. A diacetyl rest is very simply kicking up the temperature a few degrees and allowing that yeast to come back to life just a little bit so it can finish its job and clean up the diacetyl out of there. Once you remove the beer from the yeast and you still have diacetyl in it, you are now stuck with it because the yeast is gone, it can't reabsorb it, so it's going to be in the beer. Diacetyl can also be caused from a bacterial contamination. It's rare, I think, but I have experienced it. One time, Pediococcus is the culprit. Pediococcus is a pretty widespread bacteria, and I've experienced it in beer lines that are not cleaned well, and especially if the beer is traveling a long distance through that line and there's some pedio in there. By the time it comes out the tap, it comes out the faucet, you got a butterscotch beer. So buttery, butterscotch, popcorn butter, that sort of thing. So do know that It's a natural, it's usually from the fermentation process, but it can be a bacterial issue. Metallic, often described as tinny or coin-like, coiny, like sucking on a coin, or blood-like. And I've really experienced this more as being blood-like, which is iron. When we say blood-like, it means that taste of blood. If you've ever tasted blood when you cut yourself, that's iron. That's iron. So brewing with well water or something like that that has too much iron in the water can result in a beer that is metallic. Yeah, I think even astringency maybe in some stouts with a lot of dark malts, I think maybe low levels of astringency are acceptable. But that's certainly one that you don't want much of. Diacetyl is acceptable at low levels in certain beers. I think Scottish, like Newcastle, Northern English, brown, can have some low-level diacetyl. ESBs, generally no diacetyl, although very low levels are allowed. You can also have diacetyl at very low levels in a Bohemian Pilsner, and that one always kind of surprises people. But if you look real hard in a good Pilsner or Kelly, you can actually pick up a little hint of diacetyl in there. So yeah, always know when these off characters are acceptable and when they're not, because you need to know everything about them, where they come from, how to correct for them, and if they're ever acceptable, and if so, where. Right, we're going to backtrack. Just according to the handout, just a tiny little bit. German Pilsner, Bohemian Pilsner, Classic American Pilsner. Let's cover Classic American Pilsner first. The Classic American Pilsner is, if you want a short description of it, it's sort of like an American lager, maybe a premium American lager of today with more hop character. Okay? If you want more details, 6-row barley with 20 to 30% flaked maize to dilute the excess proteins. Native American hops such as clusters, traditional continental noble hops, just about any hop really is appropriate, with the exception of the citrusy, grapefruity American type hops. So you want more of a noble hop character. Oh, did I mention also hops? I don't think it was mentioned, but basically a Hallertau type hop is what's used in most American lagers. Okay, most American lagers are using a Hallertau. And then when you get to those two German varieties, again, German or Czech hops in the Dortmunder. And if you go with Hallertau for those German lagers that we've already covered, you're pretty close. It's a good go-to hop. The Hallertau region just outside of Munich is a big, probably one of the world's largest hop growing regions. Classic hop, and lots of it. So some noble hops in the Classic American Pilsner, also called a cap. Classic American Pilsner was brewed both pre-Prohibition and post-Prohibition with some differences. OGs of 1050 to 1060 would have been appropriate for pre-Prohibition. They dropped to 1044 to 1048 after Prohibition. Corresponding IBUs dropped as well from 30 to 40 to 25 to 30. So see, the hop character, the hop bitterness is a lot more than the premium lagers, the American lagers. There are no commercial examples of this, but if you ever find a beer called Bohemia, it's a Mexican beer, it's a pretty good example. I mean, I've always thought it's, you read the description, and I think it's, when you read the descriptions and try that beer, it's a pretty good match. It's got some corn adjunct in there, but it's got more bitterness and hop character. So it's, I think it's very close to what the description of this beer is. A substantial Pilsner that can stand up to the classic European Pilsners, but exhibiting the Native American grains and hops available to German brewers who initially brewed in the U.S. Right? So barley is not something that grew here in the States, still doesn't, needs a little higher altitude, a little different conditions. So there's a couple areas where we can grow barley fairly well in the States, but it's really not our crop. Our crop is corn and soybeans, and we grow those really well here in America. So when those German brewers came over and started trying to make those classic Pilsners, you're looking at awfully expensive beer if you've got to import every bit of your fermentables. So use some of those fermentables and cut it with the native grain here in America, corn. If you're in the Asian countries, rice, and you're going to reduce the cost of that beer and still make a good product. It was when we started overdoing that percentage and lowering the alcohol content and lowering the IBUs and lowering everything about it that we got into what we are in today. But if you up all of those things back to what it was and just use a little bit of corn, which is basically classic American Pilsner, that still makes a fine beer. You can still make a fine beer using some corn. Okay, so that's classic American Pilsner. Now let's talk about the two main Pilsners. The German Pils and the Bohemian Pils. Counterintuitive. Counterintuitive. I always think of German beers being malty. I always think of German beers being rich and malty. They love rich, malty beers in Germany, right? But you gotta remember it's reversed when it comes to the Pilsners. Because the Czech Pilsner came first, and the Czech Pilsner using that Moravian malt, which is an undermodified malt, needed to go through a step mash process, also because of the softness of their water and the lack of calcium and magnesium, to try to get every bit of efficiency they could out of their brewing process and that undermodified malt. They used a complex step mash, which is a decoction mash, and through that process of making that beer, you get a pretty nice malt character, right? Through a decoction mash technique, you get a pretty nice malt character. So they balance that, the Bo Pils balances that with lots of nice spicy Saaz hops and aroma, flavor, and bitterness. Finally, hear a beer getting up to that 40-45 IBU range, which is enough to give you a nice little linger back there. But with that beer being the malty version, when Germany next door took a look at it and said, "Wow, that beer is becoming really popular. We need a style like that." To make theirs different, they went with a lighter, drier, and more bitter version. Very counterintuitive for the Germans. But Bitburger is a very light, dry, bitter type beer. Always think of that one, when you do this. Pilsner Kel, nice malt character. Let's look at the ingredients. For Bo Pils, soft water, low mineral content, Saaz hops, the Moravian malted barley, Czech lager yeast. Some diacetyl is acceptable, but need not be present. Bitterness is prominent, but never harsh. Okay? Now look at the German Pils. Pilsner malt, German hop varieties. Again, you can't go wrong with Hallertau. Medium sulfate water, German lager yeast. Simple in theory. Drier and crisper than a Bo Pils, with a bitterness that tends to linger more in the aftertaste, due to both higher attenuation and a higher sulfate water, which is going to accentuate it. Lighter in body and color. Higher carbonation. Okay, so that's your big difference between those, right? In general, you're going to score beers between about 15 and 45. Always leave yourself some room for a better beer to come along. A beer in the 40s is clearly outstanding, award-winning quality beer, and not every beer is in that neighborhood. Once you get into the problematic beers, you could clearly nail something to death and take it down to 10 or 13 or something, but as soon as you get into the teens and get below 20, you're just hurting people's feelings, in my opinion. And always try to say something positive about every beer. Find something positive about every beer. Maybe it's just the appearance. Maybe it looks great. Maybe it has great head retention on it. Find something. Vienna, Oktoberfest, and Munich Dunkel. I'm going to cover those three as sort of a group. There's a reason why I do that. I want you to look at the malt ingredients in the Vienna, the Oktoberfest, and the Munich, because this is a wonderful way to remember these beers. The Vienna lager can be 100% Vienna malt. Okay? Vienna lager, Vienna malt. Amazing how that works. The Munich Dunkel can be 100% Munich malt. Munich Dunkel, Munich malt. The one in the middle is the Oktoberfest. Guess what it has? Vienna and Munich. Okay? So if you remember that, those three beers is sort of a family of beers, going from Vienna and Munich to Munich only, and kind of put those together. It's a wonderful way to memorize what's in those beers, and also helps to describe those beers. Because Vienna malt, we know, is toasty in character, right? We know Munich is more bready and bread crusty, okay? So that sort of describes those two beers. And then the Oktoberfest in the middle is a little more complex with both toasty notes and those bread crusty notes. And concoction mash as well. Okay? So that's a real good way to memorize what those beers are made of and basically what they taste like. The Vienna still can have some melanoid-rich profile. Moderately hard water. These are not hop-focused beers. 18 to 30 IBUs on the Vienna. Overall impression, characterized by soft, elegant maltiness that dries out in the finish to avoid becoming sweet. Okay? That's a Vienna. Oktoberfest. Grist varies, although German Vienna malt is often the backbone of the grain bill, with some Munich malt, as well as maybe some Pils malt and possibly some crystal malt. But again, with the German beers, typically stay away from crystal in any kind of significant quantity. Continental hops, especially noble varieties, are most authentic. Somewhat alkaline water, significant carbonate content. A decoction mash can help develop the rich malt profile. Decoction mash was not mentioned on the Vienna, but it is mentioned on the Oktoberfest. Okay. Overall impression, smooth, clean, rather rich with a depth of malt character. This is one of the classic malty styles with a maltiness that is often described as soft, complex, and elegant, but never cloying. The Munich Dunkel. Grist is traditionally made up of German Munich malt, up to 100% in some cases, with the remainder some German Pils. Small amounts of crystal malt can add dextrins and color, but should not introduce excessive residual sweetness. Slight additions of roasted malt, such as carafa or chocolate, may be used to improve color, but again, should not add strong flavors. Noble German hop varieties, German lager yeast strains, often decoction mashed to enhance the malt flavors and create a depth of color. Overall impression, characterized by depth and complexity of Munich malt and the accompanying melanoidins. rich Munich flavors, Munich malt flavors, but not as intense as a Bock or as roasty as a Schwarzbier. Okay? Let's go on and look at the Schwarzbier. The Schwarzbier has a nickname. First off, Schwarz means black in German, so it's a black beer, although they aren't always black. They're often dark brown in color. But there's a nickname for these, which is kind of a black Pils. A black Pils. And if you can remember, Schwarzbier as a black Pils, that's really going to help you describe this beer and think of its character. Lighter body, a little more hop bitterness, very restrained roastiness. Very restrained roastiness. Okay? Let's look at the ingredients. German Munich malt and Pilsner malts for the base, supplemented by small amounts of roasted malts such as Carafa for the dark color and subtle roast flavors. Noble hop varieties, clean lager yeast. Overall impression, a dark German lager that balances roasted yet smooth malt flavors with moderate hop bitterness. In comparison with under comments, in comparison with a Munich Dunkel, usually darker in color, drier on the palate, and with a noticeable but not high roasted malt edge to balance the base malt. While sometimes called a black Pils, the beer is rarely that dark. Don't expect strongly roasted porter-like flavors. Oftentimes this beer uses Cinnamon, which is a malt-derived coloring agent. Okay, makes it a little darker, but we're not looking at a porter here. Look at the mouthfeel. Look at the mouthfeel. Medium light to medium body. These are not porters and stouts. Very restrained roastiness. Very, very soft, subtle roastiness. Okay? Black Pils. Good way to remember those beers. Alright, the one we didn't hit, let's backtrack just a little bit and hit the Dark American Lager. The Dark American Lager is basically an American lager with some Cinnamon. Okay? Look at the ingredients. 2 or 6 row barley, corn or rice as adjuncts, a light use of caramel or darker malts. Commercial versions may use coloring agents. Good example of that is Shinerbach. Shinerbach. Shinerbach's not a Bach by any stretch of the imagination. It's an American lager. It's a dark American lager. So, very restrained roastiness in a similar way to the Schwarzbier, maybe even more restrained to where the color may just be a byproduct of coloring agents like Cinnamon. Okay. So it truly is like an American lager with some food color. Just a hint of roastiness. So Vienna malt, toasting, Oktoberfest, Vienna and Munich malts, decoction mashed, gets a little more complex. Munich Dunkel, Munich malt, often decoction mashed, more bready and bread crusty, but not roasty. Not roasty. The Schwarzbier, very restrained roastiness, black Pils, think of that. Cloyingly sweet basically just means that after you eat it and swallow it, you still have a sticky, sweet residual in your mouth. It's cloying. It's just lip-smacking sweet that you can't get rid of. Okay? Most beers should not be cloyingly sweet, even though there can be tons of maltiness in there. They should not be cloyingly sweet. Okay? The box. Maibach or Hellesbach in the same category. It's debatable whether they should be, but they are. Traditional Bach, Doppelbock, and Eisbach. All these beers have similarities. The biggest difference is the Maibach. The Maibach is the one that's kind of, which one is not like the others, right? The Maibach. Maibach has hop character, is the biggest thing about it to remember, is that the Maibach allows some hop character. Hop character is really not a part of the profile of other Bachs. Under the comments for the Maibach / Hellesbach, this is a good way to look at this to some degree, I guess. Can be thought of as either a pale version of a traditional Bach or a Munich Helles brewed to Bach strength. So kind of like a Munich Helles on steroids would be a Hellesbach. Helles means pale. So a Hellesbach would be like a Munich Helles on steroids. Okay. Ingredients: a base of, now unlike the Vienna, the Munich Dunkel, and the Oktoberfest, which are primarily Vienna and Munich malts, the Bachs get into a base of Pils, actually. So they get into more of this combination of Pils malt, Vienna malt, and Munich malt. Base of Pils and or Vienna with some Munich to add character. No adjuncts, noble hops, soft water, clean lager yeast, decoction mash. Decoction mash on all of the Bachs. Okay. Look at the IBUs though, and all the Bachs are fairly big, 6.3 to 7.4 on the Maibach. So they're all bigger beers. But look at the IBUs. IBUs up to 35. Up to 35 IBUs for a Bach. You know, that seems a little high for that style. Look at the Doppelbock. Doppelbock only goes up to 26. Right? So that's a big difference. That's a smaller beer. The Maibach or Hellesbach. Overall impression: relatively pale, strong, malty lager beer designed to walk a fine line between blandness and too much color. Hop character is generally more apparent than in other Bachs. Moderate to strong malt aroma, often with a lightly toasted quality and low melanoidins. No diacetyl. Flavor: rich flavor of continental pale malts dominates. Pils malt flavor with some toasty notes and or melanoidins. Little to no caramelization. May have a light DMS flavor from all that Pils malt. Well attenuated, not cloying. Moderately dry finish. Medium body. Okay, so we're still looking for that rich melanoidin, Munich, Vienna kind of malt character in these beers. But for that Maibach, it can be a little toned down, be a little more Pils focused, and a little more hop character. In the flavor, moderate to no noble hop flavor. May have a low, spicy or peppery quality from hops and alcohol. Moderate hop bitterness. More so in the balance than in other Bachs. All right, so that's how the Maibach differs. Is really in that hop presence. Okay. Traditional Bach from Einbeck. So Einbecker made the first one. Munich and Vienna malts, rarely a tiny bit of dark roasted malts for color adjustment. Continental European hop varieties, clean lager yeast, moderately hard water, 6.3 to 7.2% ABV. IBUs only go up to 27. So in a beer that big with that much malt, 27 IBUs, pretty low. Overall impression: a dark, strong, malty lager beer. Strong malt aroma, often with moderate notes of rich melanoidins and or toasty overtones. Virtually no hop aroma. Some alcohol may be noticeable. In the flavor, complex maltiness is dominated by the rich flavors of Munich and Vienna malts, which contribute melanoidins and toasty flavors. Some caramel notes may be present from decoction mashing and a long boil. Hop bitterness is generally only high enough to support the malt flavors. Well attenuated, not cloying. No hop flavor. No roasted character, no burnt character. Doppelbock. Pils and or Vienna malt for pale versions. Munich and Vienna malts for darker ones. Occasionally with a tiny bit of dark color malts like Carafa. Noble hops, moderately hard water, clean lager yeast. It's very, very similar. Overall impression, very strong and rich lager. A bigger version of either a traditional Bock or a Helles Bock, depending on the color. Aroma, very strong maltiness. Darker versions will have significant melanoidins and often some toasty aromas. A light caramel flavor from a long boil is acceptable. Lighter versions will have a strong malt presence with some melanoidins and toasty notes. Virtually no hop aroma. Some fruity aspects, often described as prune, plums, or grape, may be present, but that's due to reactions between the malt, the boil, and the aging, not from esters. Not from esters. Very slight chocolate-like aroma may be present in darker versions, but they should not be roasted or burnt. Flavor, very rich and malty. Darker versions will have significant melanoidins. There's a lot of talk about melanoidins. You've got the presence of some alcohol in there. Some fruitiness, prunes, plums, and grapes, but from malt. Malt derived. Sweetness comes from low hopping, not from incomplete fermentation. Very important. A lot of times in homebrew competitions, you'll get these beers being passed off as Doppelbocks that are really just unattenuated beers. So they're too worty. They're just unfermented, right? Unattenuated. Okay. So read the history stuff on the Doppelbock too. There's always questions about the history and all that. I think all of you, we've covered that in our prior classes. And then the Eisbock. The Eisbock is, it says, Eisbocks are not simply stronger Doppelbocks. The name refers to the process of freezing and concentrating the beer. Some Doppelbocks are stronger than Eisbocks. Some Doppelbocks are stronger than Eisbocks. Extended lagering is often needed post-freezing to smooth the alcohol and enhance the malt and alcohol balance. Ingredients, same as Doppelbocks. What happens is the ABV goes up as you freeze it and then extract out all that unfrozen goodness. Should not be sticky, syrupy, or cloyingly sweet. They still should finish, with that dry character. Everything about the aroma and flavor is really just an intensified